Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela began his life herding sheep and cattle in the rolling hills of South Africa's Eastern Cape. In his autobiography, part of which was written secretly while in prison, Mandela wrote, "I was not born with a hunger to be free. I was born free. Free in every way that I could know. Free to run in the fields near my mother's hut. Free to swim in the clear stream that ran through my village. Free to roast mealies under the stars and ride the broad backs of slow-moving bulls." It was only when I began to learn that my boyhood freedom was an illusion, when I discovered as a young man that my freedom had already been taken from me, that I began to hunger for it. Nelson Mandela's given name, Rolihlahla, literally means tugging at the branches of a tree. But at school, he was given the name of another famous leader.
When I went to school, the lady teacher, Miss Mdingane, asked, "What is your name?" I told him my African name, Rolihlahla. He says, "No, I don't want that one. You must have a Christian name." So I say, "No, I don't have one." She says, from today, you're going to be Nelson."
So henceforth, he would be known to the world as Nelson Mandela. As the son of a chief, Nelson Mandela had access to the best education available to black people in South Africa at the time. Studying at Fort Hare University, where he first became involved in student protest, his refusal to accept injustice, unfairness, and inequality would last a lifetime. South Africa, 1941. In his early 20s, Nelson Mandela moved to Johannesburg, where he first encountered the racial discrimination that would later become entrenched in law by the apartheid government. Working on the mines, and later as a clerk in a law firm, Mandela pursued his law studies and joined the African National Congress, the oldest black political organization in South Africa.
It was when I came into the African National Congress that I realized that Xhosas are only a part of the African people. That the task of the ANC was to unite the African people and out of them build a nation.
In 1948, the nationalist government was voted into power by the white electorate in South Africa, and the battle lines were clearly drawn.
Comrade Oliver said, "Well, I like this, because we now know we have an enemy in power, and I think that we're going to have a better opportunity of mobilizing our people."
Our policy is one which is called by an Afrikaans word apartheid. And I'm afraid that has been misunderstood so often. It could just as easily, and perhaps much better, be described as a policy of good neighborliness.
In 1955, the ANC and other organizations called upon people of all races to gather in Kliptown to approve the Freedom Charter, a blueprint for a free, democratic, and multiracial South Africa, in which all races would be treated equally. Nelson Mandela, one of the chief organizers of the gathering, was banned by the government from attending and was forced to watch proceedings from the sidelines. In 1956, the organizers of the Freedom Charter and other leaders in the Congress movement were charged with high treason. The trial was specifically designed to occupy the opposition and keep them out of politics. It dragged on for 4.5 years, and it would be another 40 years before the Freedom Charter finally bore fruit. South Africa, 1960, Sharpeville, a black township in the industrial area south of Johannesburg. A peaceful crowd gathered to protest against the pass laws was shot at by police. 69 people died. The nationalist government imposed martial law. All opposition was banned and thousands were jailed. When it became clear that all means of peaceful negotiation had been exhausted, Mandela went underground to lead the armed struggle.
We have made it very clear in our policy that South Africa is a country of many races. There is room for all the various races in this country. There are many people who feel that it is useless and futile for us to continue talking peace and non-violence against a government whose reply is only savage attacks on an unarmed and defenseless people.
Key government installations were targeted for sabotage. Mandela became known as the Black Pimpernel. In 1962, Mandela was captured, charged with leaving the country illegally, and sentenced to imprisonment for 5 years. Shortly afterwards, his ANC comrades were captured with evidence which incriminated Mandela. He returned to court for the Rivonia trial, where he and 8 others faced a possible death penalty.
The very speech which was made by Nelson consolidated the spirit of the people outside, because it was a defiant spirit.
I have fought against white domination, and I have fought against black domination. I have cherished the idea of a democratic and free society in which all nations live together in harmony and with equal opportunity. It is an ideal which I hope to live for and to achieve. But if needs be, it is an ideal for which I am prepared to die.
When Nelson Mandela and several of his colleagues were sentenced to life imprisonment in 1964, the political convicts were sent to Robben Island, the bleak island prison off the Western Cape Coast. Nelson Mandela was 45 years old when he became prisoner number 466 of 1964. He would be in his early 70s before he would again be a free man. Forced to perform futile hard labor in a lime quarry, the prisoners refused to be broken. Far from being diminished, Mandela's moral leadership and stature continued to grow while he was in prison. His young wife, Winnie, continued to be an inspiration to the struggle.
That day is not far when we shall lead you to freedom.
Amanda! Away to power to the people. But the struggle against apartheid would continue for another quarter century. While Nelson Mandela and his co-accused served life sentences on Robben Island, other leaders of all races and in all spheres campaigned for change. Many faced imprisonment or exile. And around the world, ordinary people showed their horror of apartheid and their support for the struggle.
The purpose, friends, of this boycott is for the people of Britain to register on the widest possible scale their passionate protest against an evil and repulsive doctrine which says that a man's legal status, a man's political rights, a man's economic opportunities, a man's social position shall depend solely upon the color of his skin.
But in 1976, Soweto school children marched in protest, and townships around the country erupted in violence. It was the beginning of the end for apartheid, but the struggle dragged on for more than a decade as the Afrikaner nationalist government clung to power.
I've been lenient and patient. Don't push us too far.
In the late 1980s, amid a tide of world pressure, the South African government was forced to accept the inevitable and began dismantling apartheid. In 1990, at the age of 71, Mandela was released unconditionally.
I stand here before you not as a prophet, but as a humble servant of you, the people. I place the remaining years of my life in your hands.
After leading negotiations for a new South Africa, Nelson Mandela cast his vote in the first free and democratic elections and became the country's first black president.
Never, never, and never again shall it be that this beautiful land will again experience the oppression of one by another.
For the duration of his presidential term, and throughout what should have been a well-earned retirement, he has worked tirelessly to entrench the ideals he has so long stood for, becoming universally revered as an icon of leadership and humanity.
When I told one of my advisors a few months ago that I wanted to retire, he growled at me, "Coach, you are retired." If that is really the case, then I should say, I now announce that I'm retiring from retirement.
But in his retirement from retirement, Nelson Mandela has continued to give his support and generosity in countless ways, creating an enduring legacy through the Nelson Mandela Foundation, the Nelson Mandela Children's Fund, the Mandela Roads Foundation, the Nelson Mandela Institute for Education and Rural Development, and the 46664 campaign. Through 46664, he continues to lend the full force of his extraordinary talent, intellect, and heart to a problem that faces not only his own country, but the world at large. Nelson Mandela, Madiba, we salute you.
I was thinking of her, of course, every day. And also I wanted to give her encouragement to know that there is somebody somewhere who cares for her.
Yes.
I had been married, you see, for 4 years when I was sent to jail. And she was a very young person, inexperienced. She had 2 children, and she couldn't bring them up properly because of the harassment and persecution by the police. That was a very difficult moment for me. She was being hounded from one job to the other by the police. They would go to the employer and say, by keeping this woman here, you're starting trouble. The feeling of frustration and helplessness was there because there was nothing I could do about it.
My husband has been fighting for the liberation of the African people.
You were sentenced to life in prison. You're gone for many, many years. She has a life outside. She meets other men. How did you deal with that?
Well, that was a question, which one had to wipe out of his mind. One must not be inquisitive. It's sufficient that this is a woman who is loyal to me, who supports me, and who comes to visit me, who writes to me. That's sufficient.
What about your, in the same vein, the fact that, again, you think you might be in prison for life, and the idea that you might never make love to a woman again, that your sexuality would just atrophy? How do you deal with that in prison?
We never thought that we would die in jail. The morale was too high for that. We knew that one day would return.
But my question though is about sexuality. I mean, you're away from women. You're just with a group of men for all of these years. I mean,
oh well, one gets used to that. I was brought up in high schools, boarding schools, where you were without women for almost 6 months. You exercise discipline of yourself. Mm-hmm. And then when I went to prison, I resigned myself to the fact that I had no opportunity for sexual expression.
You would know, this is the grandmother of Africa, Winnie Mandela. And let me just assume that my continent knows more about me than I know myself. It's absolutely wonderful to be here as a continuation of my family in South Africa.
Thank you very much, Madam. We appreciate your time here with us today. And we do know that our viewers around the world, not only in Africa, do know Mrs. Winnie Mandela. And we thank you for your time, once again, in Jesus' name.
Today, he said that a producer met with him in the room, and he said, "What is the subject of today's show?" And they said, and she said, "Nelson Mandela, you are the subject of today's show." He goes, "Oh, all right." He's so humble that the very idea that he was going to be on for a whole hour was not something that he expected. You'd also said to me one evening, you said, "We made the brain dominate the blood."
Our emotion said, the white minority is an enemy. We must never talk to them. But our brain said, if you don't talk to this man, your country will go up in flames. And for many years to come, this country will be engulfed in rivers of blood. So we had to reconcile that conflict. And our talking to the enemy was the result of the domination of the brain over emotions.
Okay, I'm still trying to understand, though. You began the peace talk, and you end up coming out of prison, and there is no bitterness. How is there no bitterness?
Well, I hated oppression. And when I think about the past, the type of things they did, I feel angry. You have a limited time to stay on earth. You must try and use that period for the purpose of transforming your country into what you desire it to be. A democratic, non-racial, non-sexist country. And that was a great task.
This has not happened before nor since, that as he was leaving the building, every one of the Harpo staff, of the 300 people in the building, lined the hallway to shake his hand as he was going out the door. And I walked him down the long path to the garage, and we now call that the Nelson Mandela hallway here at Harpo, because he walked that path, and as we're going down the path, he was shaking hands, and we took pictures, and now all of those pictures line the hallway of Nelson Mandela. Never before.
Masekela.
There's a train that comes from Zimbabwe to Zambia. There's a train that comes from Angola and Mozambique. There's a train that comes from Botswana, from Swaziland and Lesotho. There's a train that comes from Malawi, from Namibia. And this train brings with it young and old African men who come and work on conscription in the gold and mineral mines of Johannesburg and its surrounding metropoli, 16 hours a day for almost no pay. Deep, 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 deep down in the belly of the earth, when they digging and drilling for that mighty, shiny, evasive stone, or when they dish that mishmash much food into their iron plates with the iron shovel, or when they sit in their funky, flea-ridden, filthy barracks, think about their lands and herds that have been taken away from them, about their loved ones that they may never see again. And when they hear that choo-choo train and screaming and a puffing in the far-off distant horizon, they always cuss and they curse the gold train that brought them to Johannesburg. What is this? Oh, mama, lati. Stimela, si amanga malate, sivele tala kubai. Helele sangilata wa kutang hebabe. What is this? Zamba malate. There's a train that comes from Zimbabwe and Zambia. There's a train that comes from Angola and Mozambique. There's a train that comes from Botswana, from Swaziland and Lesotho. There's a train that comes from Malawi and from Namibia. And this train brings with it young and old African men who come and work on conscription in the gold and mineral mines of Johannesburg and its surrounding metropoli, 16 hours a day for almost no pay. Deep, 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 deep down in the belly of the earth, when they digging and drilling for that mighty, shiny, evasive stone, or when they dish that mish-mash food into their iron plates with the iron shovel, or when they sit in their funky, flea-ridden, filthy barracks, think about their lands and herds that have been taken away from them, about their loved ones that they may never see again. And when they hear that choo-choo train and screaming and a puffing in the far-off distant horizon, they always cuss and they curse the coal train that brought them to Johannesburg. Sivele dala kumbai Sangela ragwa boka Hebabe What is this Zomba Malati Zomba Malati Stimela Zihanga Malati Sivele dala kumbai What is this Zomba Malate? Zomba Malate. Yo, sitting you le compone. Shalala mama. Sitting jangezi, shalala mama. Come me got the Se calele se tomba se tuba mayo Asibuya na tana Se calele se gane se tuba Asibuya na tana Se calele se cherries
So many